The headlines in India are dominated by the Supreme Court dismissing the plea for postponement of joint entrance examination and national eligibility and entrance test. These examinations are conducted nationwide for ranking candidates for engineering and medical schools. The court expressed that an academic year cannot be wasted and life must go on. Many opposed the idea, including some in the civil society and the opposition parties. The coronavirus pandemic has disturbed the regular functioning of the colleges and universities. 90% of the educational institutes have been closed since the outbreak in March. Nearly 1.3 billion students all over the globe have been severely affected. Remote learning has become the new norm. The framework of online teaching was not on the cards. The curriculum was not designed in such a format. The teaching methodology was not technologically oriented. The swift transition and its impact on education can only be assessed over time. The government and the court feel that not conducting the entrance exam will throw the whole system off balance. The lack of admission will also impact the students that will graduate from grade 12 next year, as students from 2 years will be competing for the same seats. Many deserving candidates would be left out, and there will be large-scale impact. Also, if examinations are conducted for 2 years, students together and seats are doubled next year, it will be unfair on the students from the 2021 batch, since the 2020 batch would have had an extra year to prepare. While the impact of COVID-19 is going to be large on how the educational sector works, what will be required is a paradigm shift in higher education. But today the challenge is if students will be inducted for the year. There are pros and cons, but like many are saying, the show must go on. New Delhi Bureau, Democracy News Live.
On one side, the nation is battling every day against COVID-19. And in the parallel universe, the education ecosystem is getting ready to roll out its yearly schedule on admissions. Good evening and welcome to our show It Matters on Democracy News Live. Over 8.58 lakh students have registered this year for JEE. Now, JEE is a joint entrance exam. It's for engineering students. And 15.97 lakh students have registered for Neet. This is for medical students. But according to the All India Students Association, over 4,200 students observed a day-long hunger strike at their respective homes demanding the postponement of the entrance exams. Many students took to Twitter to push forward their demands to postpone these exams. Satyagraha against exam and COVID was the trending hashtag on social media. Many social activists and opposition party leaders also came in support of these students. Sweden's teen environmentalist Greta Thunberg also joined the outrage. But the Supreme Court of India did not relent. The court expressed the importance of an academic year. They said that a year of students cannot be wasted and life must go on. The global figures are already quite grim. Around 24 million children are at risk of not returning to school next year. Majority of them are going to be girls due to this whole economic fallout of COVID-19. The educational financial gap is also likely to increase by 1/3. During the second quarter of 2020, 86% of children at the primary level have been out of school in poor countries compared to 20% in developed countries. So the impact's going to be large, and we have to begin understanding how this is all going to unfold. We thought we will bring in a student from a university to start with, and then two professors. So joining me today first is Shivangi Anand. Shivangi, welcome to the show. Explain to me, because you hear from your student community and you see around your university as well, what's happening on the ground there? Why do students want that the NEET and the JEE exams be postponed?
See, what I believe is, and it's actually quite ironic because if you see the release of the new education policy also, the center was always vying for a technological shift in the way that education was manifested, at least in the Indian society, which was considered a step, right? A lot of people lauded it altogether also. Except very recently, Delhi University also conducted its test found that there were so many technological glitches. It was largely exclusionary, and a lot of people who came from diverse backgrounds couldn't even access going ahead and like attempting these tests in the first place. What is harder in terms of the JEE and the NET is that there is no going back from it. That it is an entrance exam, which is a competitive exam in the face. So even if there was, let's say, an open book exam which was held for graduates, at least they have an option of like, let's say, attempting that exam again. Except for in a competitive space, for a competitive exam, there will be a wastage of the entire year anyway for individuals who can't appear for these exams in the first place, which is what becomes largely problematic. And along with that, there are various state governments that have gone ahead and displayed that this entire policy of exams is largely exclusionary. Only the center that has been pushing for the conduction of exams on a nationwide basis, which also makes students feel as if it were almost an anti-student policy that they have been, let's say, emitting since the time of the anti-CAA protests, which is when they went ahead and manhandled students. So as of
Right.
now, our entire student community is largely disillusioned from the policies that the center has been passing against them, or policies that have direct consequences on them in the first place. Is,
Sure,
I
sure.
think, what
Shivangani, so the point you're trying to make, let me extrapolate that for you a bit, is that
right.
one, there is little trust on the government, the present government of the day by students, a large number of them, because obviously the government of India saw massive protests around CAA. Initially, they tried to brand this as protests by Muslims alone, but then it turned out there were all kinds of people protesting. And
Right.
the idea of CAA did not sit very well with the student community, especially. Secondly, what you're saying is it's going to impact people who come from more poor backgrounds. They will not have an opportunity enough to sit down for the exam on time. They haven't have time to read. Their internet connectivity is not great for them to have studied very well. So they are going to be impacted the most. So I think those are valid concerns. But
Right.
explain to me a little more around the idea of how large is the impact? Are students at the PhD level impacted as well? I'm told by a lot of PhD students, they haven't received their grants. They're sitting without money, and a lot of them are locked outside their universities. Can't access their rooms, they can't go study, they don't have access to their books. How is this going to go on? Like, you can't keep shutting down all of this.
Absolutely, I agree. Honestly, the saddening part of it all is that universities are shunning students away from the space that they knew to consume academia in the first place, or that they found was the most accessible point for them to be able to educate themselves in a better manner in order for them to write their thesis papers, or even as much as be able to study for their examinations, to a point where, along with saying that, oh, you need to now evacuate your hostel rooms because we can't accommodate you anymore, and also not giving them access to the same resources in the first place, they have also along with that added to fee hikes that are seen that are seen countrywide now. So private universities, inclusive of like a government college such as JNU, which has hiked its fees, and a lot of individuals are finding it hard to, alongside the pandemic, because PhD students often provide for themselves. They don't have, like, support from
Don't have support
extraneous.
from their parents and no external
Correct.
external support. You're absolutely right. And I know a lot of them under trouble right now. A lot of them are saying, I'm 28 years old and I have always relied on this because I was studying for my PhD and I was getting my grant, and all of a sudden 5 months, no money. Where do I go? Let me bring in Dr. Dhananjay Singh. He's a professor at JNU. Dr. Dhananjay Singh, explain to me what Shivangini is talking about. Does this make sense, or is there something missing in the argument the students are putting forward?
I could hear the half of what you said
Okay.
because of beauty related to what
Dr. Dhananjay Singh, I think what students are saying are that there is an impact on PhD students, their access to hostels, their grants which they used to get every month, And there has been a situation where the students in the poor parts of the country, the ones who don't have access to all the information and internet and good quality, they will suffer the most under this new examination by Neet and JE, which is happening right away without much of a gap. Do you agree with that?
Well, yes. I mean, there are two ways to look at this. One, of course, is that we are in a very overwhelming, situation. We have been through this very tough time. Nobody has. Where students have gone back to their hometowns. Most of them, of course, in JNU and from JNU. And there are floods, there are other issues. We have students who come from different backgrounds. Obviously, not everybody has access to technology, internet facility. These are real issues. Kind of somehow move on in the sense that I think Supreme Court has also taken opinion in that. As a teacher, it's very extremely sensitive. Such students find it daunting, almost impossible to write these exams. But somehow, are we staring, in a situation of completely having lost a year? I don't think we are for that. So that's what I believe.
Okay. All right. Let me bring in Dr. Rajesh Kambot. He's a joint director, at PSS, Central Institute of Vocational Education. Mr. Kambot, could you please tell me, you're hearing from a lot of students as well. Explain to me, how is this a good time to hold the NEET and the joint entrance exam, or do you think it should be pushed back?
There are good evening. I hope I'm loud enough.
Yes, you are. Please.
Okay. First of all, we have to understand what my colleague from JNU was talking about, in that we are living in a very unprecedented time. Nobody has ever imagined that we'll be having this kind of situation, and that too at such a scale. We never imagined the magnitude of this problem which we are going to encounter today. So it all happened without any notice to all of us and all that, and we have to live with this. Now, you have seen many stories, many discussions has already going on, and it is a well acknowledged fact that we have to live with this current reality. As you started the show with giving lots of statistics and all that, these are all eye-opener to all of us and all that. If the Supreme Court or the government is taking some stand on the issue of conducting the examination, there are two things we have to understand. Students are the capital, human capital for our country, and our whole future depends on this. And if you see a long-term perspective, we have to see the holistic way of looking at this problem. There cannot be a solution that without going with the exam and you go push with the situation like this way. It cannot be called like this way. The students also has to understand the reality on the ground, that it is in the larger interest of themselves. It is larger interest of the country that we have to build into it. And until and unless we accept this one, we are still going to continue with the debate and discussion whether we should go for it or we should not go for it. Second is, India is...
In this case, when it's a little pressing at this time, because the Supreme Court obviously has ruled that the exam should be held, and I understand your perspective. You're giving a larger overall arcing view, but do you think a lot of students will suffer, and some underprivileged students will not get the same chance that slightly more privileged students will get if NEET and JEE is held with its present timeline?
Of course, this will have a small impact. We cannot deny that it will not have any impact, particularly for the students who are coming from a background which do not have access to the resources, which do not have that. But I firmly believe, talent has something much beyond all these things. the resiliency and the grit, the tenacity. If even a student who is coming from a rural background or a poor background, there are hundreds of cases in our country who are an inspiring example for students across the country, who have become even the IAS officers. And it is sheer grit, the resilience they have gone through all the struggles and all that. So I'm very confident, considering all the diversity of our country, I'm still confident, when there is a challenge. I have seen students coming from, such a background or with such society has always come up to the standards. I mean, they have shown their resilience and fight back to prove themselves that it is more talent rather than only the resources and all that. I will give you a number of examples where lots of resources are available for an urban student, but still he is not able to make it. So it will be sheer resiliency, the grit, the hard work, the commitment, the tenacity to get involved into all this preparation, which will matter more than all these resources. Definitely, the one advantage the student in the urban will have access to the internet. And you have to also understand a country's size of ours. It is practically difficult in one short period of time to make accessible everything available to the student. But please understand one thing also. India is one of the few countries in the world where the cost for the data is very, very low
The
compared to
cost
many
is one
developed.
thing, Mr. Combat cost is one thing, but access is another. I
Yeah,
operate out of rural India every week. I literally live 3 days in rural India. Believe me, the networks are poor, the access is poor, there are no hospitals. It's a very bad state. It is, if anybody, is to doubt how India functions, literally for 100 kilometers, there isn't a decent hospital. If somebody gets injured, I've had to put people in vehicles and bring them back here to the city in Delhi. So I think the challenges are huge. And I think what we are trying to talk here today is to understand, is there any value to delaying these exams? Is there any value to, push back these exams? Shivangani, do you want to come in here and kind of talk a bit more about, what are you hearing from your student community? What would they ideally like at this point of time?
My interaction with the student community has mostly been within the atmosphere of Delhi University, which is to say that courses within the spectrum of liberal arts or all courses which have been limited to the university space in and of itself, whether it be postgraduate students or undergraduate students. So here I would like to take in a bit of Sir, who was talking about how it is possible to achieve anything that you possibly want to through resilience. We showed the same resilience when we were protesting on the streets. Our professors showed the same resilience when they were protesting for us during a pandemic to stop the case because class would not be participate in those exams in the first place. I don't think that students believe it's about resilience. It's more or less about a pandemic that is taking place, and along with dealing with that, a lot of students don't have access to even a book in the first place. Which is to say that there was actually a a Google form which was circulated among students, and they were asked if online classes were even held at all for them, and most of them said that they were not. Even professors found it hard to be able to teach their children, to teach their students. So, at a point in time where students are not able to grasp that knowledge, they can't be expected to be these resources. For you to be a human resource, there needs to be a certain amount of training and certain amount of effort that is put into you. You can't be expected to wake up in the morning and decide for yourself that it's a pandemic and you're going to be resilient and therefore be able to pass a competitive exam that students take years and years to practice for. So that is, I think, the larger ground reality that is being faced by the student community at large.
No, I agree with you. I think there are challenges with it, and there has to be a little more, well-rounded decision making that has to happen around
Right.
when the exam should be held. Dr. Dhananjay Singh, do you think a real look needs to be taken on when this needs to happen. Do you think the government should, take a different view, even though the Supreme Court has ruled on when the exams should be held and how they should be held? What kind of lag time do we need to make sure students have access to the educational tools that they require to take the exam?
Well, I should say that perhaps we should think of, even though we suddenly forced into this situation, it takes time to create facilities. We also should know that the pandemic has, in a way, exposed our education system, or in a way, what facilities we have provided for education in this country. We have talked of 6% GDP is that yes, I mean they cannot be we cannot be without access to technology to be used in every sector, and perhaps more and more use of technology should be there in the education sector as well. So perhaps it's a wake up call for us. Coming to the specific issue that we are discussing, well, you see, there are students, and sad to say for me and for every one of us to admit that the students were from the weaker sections. I come from a village. I've traveled from a village in Bihar to JNU, son of a farmer. So I understand. I understand. Even when I go to my village, it's extremely difficult to have a connectivity on my mobile phone. So we in India is the diversity is extremely interesting but challenging as well. But then there would be students who would like to take the exam. We are a democratic country after all. So there will be a section of students who like to take the exam, a section of students who will be facing problems, and a section of students who like to voice their protest, a section of students who say that, well, I've been working hard for a year, let me see how I can write this exam, because challenges is challenge these students coming from weaker section, from weaker caste, tribes, yeah, right? They face problem all the time. Yes, the problem has been aggravated right now because of the pandemic. What I like to say is this, that, well, it's a complex reality. Perhaps one could think of better facilitating the taking of this exam and empowering students who need support. But just to say that, well, there should not be should be no exam, or to say that, well, we'll have the exam right now, and no matter, we're not much concerned about who is facing what problem. Of course, extremely insensitive. So I think we need to be where perhaps them should find themselves supported by their institution where they have studied uh, the government to make it possible for them. Yeah, and they're also facing lots of mental issues. You see, pandemic. So it's a very
Right. No,
sensitive situation
absolutely.
for
You're
some.
absolutely right, Dr. Dhananjay. So I think it's a complex reality what we have in front of us. It's easy to say postpone the exam. It's easy to say don't have the exam right away. But I think a more textured look needs to be taken. People need to begin understanding that the government will have to work slightly harder this time. These are young students. These are students who will be competing, and each mark determines the future for the next many years in life. So slightly more a closer look, slightly more detailed look would be required. Thank you, Shivangani, for joining us for this show. Thank you very much, Dr. Dhananjay Singh and Mr. Rajesh Khambayat. I really appreciate you joining me, because I think it's a very complex one. And, absolutely, we'll just have to wait and watch, but the government should take a little more closer look before they make the decision. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
It Matters on
Thank you so
Democracy
much.
News
Pleasure.
Live. And good night and good luck.
Thank you.